Hello, everyone, and welcome to the session. We're just going to give people a couple of minutes to join, get settled in. But if you want to say hello in the chat, let us know where you're joining from. We love to see that. But yeah, we'll be getting going in just a minute. All right, welcome everyone. It seems like we have a lot of people from America and Canada joining us today. I'm coming live to you from Basingstoke, and Simona is in sunny Scotland today. But thank you so much for joining the webinar. And let's get going. So today is all about data in motion, how to engage and impress with animated charts. Thank you for joining. Um, I am Annie. I will be your co-host today. I am a social media specialist here at Flourish, and I absolutely love telling stories, especially telling stories with data. And that brings us over to our lovely host for today, Simona.
Hi, everyone. Very excited to see so many of you here today. My name is Simona. I am content specialist at Flourish, and I am your host today. As you can imagine, I love all things Flourish. I love experimenting with the tool, trying to do the impossible with it, and create all amazing, beautiful content and data stories with it. And hopefully today we help you to do the same.
Amazing. Okay, so I'm just going to run a few bits of housekeeping before we can get going. First of all, if you could ask any questions through the chat, I'll be monitoring the chat and I will try to get back to you all as quick as I possibly can. If you want any more information, you can head to our webinar page. We have a bunch of resources, bits and bobs on there that are really good. We will be sending out a recording and the slides after the webinar before the end of the week, so keep an eye out for that in your inbox. But if you want to hear from us even more, make sure you sign up to get email notifications and join our newsletter. It is filled with amazing, amazing content and loads of resources. So, yeah, definitely register there. But I think that is it from me. I am going to leave you with Simona and to get started on this very exciting webinar.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Annie. Again, hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, which is all about using animation and motion in data visualization that will hopefully help you to engage and impress your audience. We have quite a few things prepared for you for today. So we're going to start with a bit of kind of like a theoretical part, which is how animation transforms data storytelling. And I say theoretical, but actually this section is just like filled with examples, different things that you can do to kind of like incorporate motion in your charts and graphs. Then we're going to move on to how to create animated charts with Flourish. We'll be doing a bit of a demo. If this is the first time you see Flourish as a tool, as a kind of like a data visualization tool that you've never used, or you just need a bit of a refresher, that might be the best webinar for you because we're going to create two different types of charts from scratch. So hopefully that's going to be useful for all of you. And then we're going to wrap up with some other animated examples and inspiration and resources. So starting straight away with our first topic of the day, why is animation a game changer for data storytelling? And in order for me to answer this question in the best possible way, I thought that maybe we can start with an example. This is a static chart created with Flourish. It basically shows the history of the British pound, or how many US dollars 1 pound has bought over time between 1982 and up to 2022. And as you can see in this chart here, everything is kind of looking fine. We follow some good data visualization practices. We provide enough context with like axis highlights and annotations throughout the chart. We have interactive pop-ups that show people like the exact value of the pound to US dollar ratio, and generally does the job well. But in my personal opinion, it only serves a good purpose when it's kind of like out of context in its current shape and form. Because when you think about it, we have a lot of things going on here, but at the moment, this chart is actually embedded on a empty white slide in a presentation, in a webinar. So like there is no distraction surrounding this chart. So basically the only focus the only focus is on the chart itself. But if you imagine that such a chart is actually embedded in something like a news article or like a social media post where like, the space is even like more constrained and things like that, things might be a little bit too kind of like just messy and a bit too much to kind of like, grasp at the first glance. So obviously, the next following question would be, okay, so how do we avoid kind of like overwhelming our audience with something that like chart like this one, where there is just way too much happening? You might actually like know the answer already. That's true animation in our current webinar. But before we actually see how animation helps breaking down these kind of like big data, let's go back to just a couple of like basic data storytelling principles. I'm sure for those of you who have already joined previous webinars, like webinars of Flourish, you have already seen this slide, and I'm pretty sure that you'll keep seeing this slide in the future, but that's because it's really important. And this question alone is one of the most important questions when it comes to data, like visualizing any data. And that's, how do I tell a good data story? And the answer to that question is actually through your hook, by finding your hook. And the hook in data visualization is something that's basically worth reporting on. That could be a moment of change, it could be an interesting point, or an unexpected pattern. And the problem comes when your data has all of them, for example, or two of them, and you need to break things a little bit to make sure that the reader fully grasps your message. And the good news is that animation can help you with this exact problem. So if we take a look at the same example, here is like our line chart again, but this time this is in a Flourish story. So a Flourish story is kind of like working like a presentation, like a slide deck, but instead of having like different pages, as we have like, for example, for this webinar generally, the Flourish story allows you to create different states of the same or different charts that kind of like tell a cohesive narrative. So in our case, for example, we can start with like this view of our chart, but then what we can do is actually we can zoom in into a specific chunk of time. Like in our case here, we're like zooming in between 1982 and the late and the late 80s. And here we have an axis highlight that shows like that the pound to dollar rate has actually reached an all-time low in February 1985. And this is something that you might not actually notice, which is actually quite crucial for our current chart in its kind of like initial shape and form. Then we can continue by providing more context, moving further down in time. We're going to the early 1990s, where we can see that another major crisis has occurred, which is the Black Wednesday. For people who are not necessarily familiar with the British pound, or like generally not, may have no idea about this, you can provide more context by explaining more what the Black Wednesday actually is, how did it happen? And here we do it with like caption in our story, we do it through animation and annotations. And we can keep going. Like the good thing about the animation and about the Flourish stories is that like you can provide as much context as you want, depending obviously on your chart, depending on your context, depending on who do you present this to. Obviously, if this is like something that you do for internal stakeholders, and if you work in finance and everybody's familiar with the data that you're looking at, animation might not necessarily be needed. But depending on like kind of like the purpose of your chart, this kind of breakdown might actually provide more context to your readers and make your chart more memorable. So for example, like, yeah, comparing again this initial view, now, like by going through this animated story, it might be more likely for you to pay attention to this one kind of like low right here in the beginning of our graph. And this example actually shows us one of the biggest benefits of incorporating motion in your data projects, which is actually breaking down complex data. So instead of overwhelming our audience or kind of like relying on the user to explore the data themselves, we guide them through animation and show them key insights and just make complex data easier to digest. And this is just one of the benefits that animation kind of like has when it comes to data visualization. There are many, many more, and here just a couple of them. We're gonna go to deeper into each benefit in just a second, so then I can also show you one example, but this slide just kind of shows them at a glance. So apart from breaking down complex data, you can use animation to illustrate changing stats or ranks with racing charts, for example. You can simplify the comparison process of your series by smoothly transitioning between different data points with filters, grid of charts, and kind of like, yeah, different transitions. And last but not least, you can also capture your attention and just like wow every single person that sees your visualizations. This shouldn't be overlooked at all because by making a lasting impressions with your charts, by asking people to spend more time with your project, with your visualization, and by providing them more context, you can obviously make your data story and the message more memorable and build trust, and even kind of like establish a sense of expertise in your industry. So I think one super memorable, stunning animated charts in your reports, on your website, on social media can actually push you as the go-to resource in your industry. So we should definitely not underestimate the power of engagement when it comes to data viz. And as I said, we're going to go through all of those benefits and show some practical examples. But before that, I just wanted to stop here for a second and talk a little bit about when is animation must and when is actually more of a nice to have. Because animation is a very powerful tool in data storytelling, but as with any tool and any kind of like method of visualizing data, it works best when it's used with intention. So the goal is to make things simple, not introduce unnecessary movement just for the sake of it. And what I mean by this is that if your data set is initially complex and it will benefit from breaking down a little bit, as we just saw right now. Or, for example, you want to highlight key patterns and just generally guide interpretation, like with different transitions between your charts, then animation is definitely needed. But when you have like simpler charts, such as our example here, maybe animation will actually make this chart and kind of like the inside of this chart slightly more complex than it should be. Because at the moment here, let's say that in this particular example, the goal is to show that Argentina is the most recent winner of the World Cup and it has this specific number of titles throughout. And here is the comparison with all the other winners of the World Cup ever. So in that case, maybe this is a very simple, very straightforward and easy to read chart. And in this case, maybe we don't necessarily need motion at all. Here, instead, what we need is an effective use of color and effective use of text in our header so that every single person that sees this chart at the for the first time can immediately grasp what's the insight. And we in Flourish provide like a lot of guidance on different ways to kind of like make your visualizations more effective. So obviously color and text is one of are just two of them. And of course, animation is another one. But yeah, so like long story short, if you're wondering, the question is not how do I animate my chart? The question is rather, would animation help me tell a better data story? So yeah, now we have this out of the way. Let's continue quickly with actually seeing some examples. With the previous benefits that we just briefly kind of like touched upon, here we have yet another example of how animation can help break down complex data sets. And this again is utilizing the Flourish stories. Today, in both of our demos, we're actually going to create a Flourish story. So you, by the end of today's webinar, you will be more familiar with this kind of like feature in Flourish. But in this kind of example here, again, we have a very similar structure where we have movie set accidents across like almost 100 years of cinema. And each bubble represents a movie colored by the outcome of the accidents. So for example, this is a fantastic chart to kind of like explore by yourself if you have the time. But because I have created this chart, and obviously the reason why I'm making this chart is to like tell some sort of a story. I am most familiar with the data in its current shape and format, so why wouldn't I give more visual clues and like provide more context to the reader? And we can do this by creating, again, like very simple axis highlight that the most accidents have actually occurred in the 80s. If this is of any interest to the reader, they can zoom in further, again, breaking down the timeline by decade, for example. And here we can see that the biggest kind of like accident across like any movie set has happened during the production of Roar, where 70 people were injured by untrained animals on set. So we point the attention to kind of like the biggest accident in that decade. Then we can zoom out of the timeline and then continue, like, for example, by splitting our chart into a grid of charts where we can see a trend line for when it comes to like some of the outcomes of those accidents. And we can continue on and on and on. So yeah, basically, like if you have very big data, you would like to provide more context, breaking down your chart into like smaller, more digestible chunks is definitely a good shout. When it comes to another benefit, which is to illustrate changing stats or ranks, we cannot talk about like generally motion in data visualization without talking about racing charts. But what I'll actually do is I'll stop this bar chart race at the moment because I feel that if you like the nature of the bar chart races is just so engaging that if it keeps playing in the background as I'm talking, you might not even be listening to me anymore. And honestly, that's actually part of what makes bar chart races that popular. So bar chart races are a fantastic way to illustrate change over time, especially for shifting ranks or evolving trends. And the one thing about those chart types is that the movement naturally draws attention and it makes them a compelling storytelling tool. This is one of our most popular templates in Flourish, and I'm sure that you have seen tens, if not hundreds or thousands of bar chart races online, on YouTube, on LinkedIn, anywhere and everywhere. They're very engaging. They're very fun to watch. They're just like, yeah, very like naturally, I think every single person is kind of driven to watch the from beginning to end. But that said, with all this motion happening at once, it might be easy for the viewers to focus on the race and the animation itself rather than the key takeaways of your story. So like in this example, we've already kind of like been towards the almost the very end of the bar chart race. But do you actually remember how many goals Italy had by 2002 or whatever? Likely not. And of course, that's not the point of having this chart and to visualize the data in this kind of like shape and format. But like, yeah, it's good to remember that with this specific template, it might be easy for the viewers to focus on the race rather than the key takeaways. So whenever we're talking about bar chart races, it's good for you to kind of like remember these four like very basic tips. The first one is to limit the number of categories. So like don't use like 50 series, 50 countries, 50 people racing companies in your bar chart race, limit to 10 to 12 series maximum, because otherwise things are getting way too messy and just like very complex. Another plus might be to slow down the animation speed, because then the viewer has more time to digest what's actually happening in the end. You can always add context with captions. So the Flourish bar chart race actually supports timed captions. So for example, you can add kind of like a dynamic annotation that says between this year and that year, something has happened. And last but not least, use them sparingly. So if the goal is to engage your audience, if you really want to kind of like attract attention on you have a more light-hearted data set that you kind of like would like to visualize in a more dynamic, more engaging way, that might be or you need an icebreaker, for example, for a report, for a presentation, that's a really good shout. But if you kind of like want to focus the attention on specific time series or like specific point of your chart, maybe you can consider a different chart type. And one such chart type might actually be the way I like to call it, the bar chart race's cousin, which is the line chart race. Because the line chart race for me takes a slightly more structured approach. Basically, it works similarly to the bar chart race in that it shows rankings over time, but what makes it really useful, and for me, especially in the reveal mode, as we have like our chart here, is that the x-axis stays visible throughout, from the beginning till the very end of my visualization. And this means that instead of like only seeing data for each time steps, we kind of get to see the timeline, the full timeline by the end. So like if I play the visualization again, you will see here we're looking at like the total points for like different countries during the Eurovision. And here we have everything from 2016, slowly, all the way up to 2023, for example. So in this way, we can actually kind of like get a better idea of like where did each country start and how does it end. And this kind of solves one of the biggest challenges of bar chart races, where everything is constantly shifting, like to be a bit harder to retain the full picture. But with the line chart race, this can actually be possible. So yeah, when it comes to changing stats or ranks, again, racing charts can be one of your best friends. Continuing with yet another benefit of incorporating motion, this is rather kind of like more of a benefit of other features rather than animation on its own. But I think it's still really good to mention. And what I'm talking about here is transitioning. So this is kind of like one of the most effective ways to use motion in data visualization. So in this case, for example, here on the right, we have this bar chart that's split into grid of charts, also called small multiples, for kind of like clearer pattern visibility and structure. So for example, here we have films on the left and TV series on the right. And we have like a variety of filters. If I play this time slider, for example, this is an interactive control that 99% of our Flourish charts come with, you will see that kind of like my bars are like transitioning from one view to another, like from one date to another. And this kind of like transitioning between them, the motion and the animation, actually makes the information harder to like easier to retain. So for example, if I focus on a specific movie or like, yeah, TV series in this case, I can kind of like just see whether it goes all the way to the top, it goes to the bottom, or disappears completely. Whereas if animation was not used here, the jumping from one date to another might have been a bit more complicated. And the same goes obviously with like the static controls and filters, which basically shows us different things with like weekly hours viewed, weekly views, and cumulative weeks. So one of the biggest benefits of Flourish is that regardless of whether we're talking about lines, bar, pie charts, scatter plots, etc., you can adjust everything here. Like you can adjust whether you want your axes to be dynamic, so things to disappear or to stay static, or like you can adjust it however you want it. And another thing is that you can also add a variety of filters that just make your exploration of your data a bit more easier to the viewer. And again, like default benefit of that would be, of course, that all these different transitions are animated. And last but not least, we should talk about maps, of course, because maps are also one of the most fantastic ways for you to use animation and to really, really mesmerize your audience with your visualization. In this chart, for example, we have a data set that basically shows the rise of Airbnbs is in Istanbul from the early 2010s all the way to post-COVID. And in this visualization, for example, we have yet again used the Flourish story, where you get this like super cool effect, which first of all allows you to focus at a specific chunks of both your map and your timeline, as you will notice here, where we have only the data from 2012 to 2016 playing. You have this absolutely stunning visual effect, which transitions from a place to place. You can zoom in, zoom out, save your state, provide additional context in the captions, and just do anything you want, really. And the best part of it is that obviously you do this without any coding. It takes just a few minutes. And one of our demo for today is actually a 3D map. So hopefully by the end, you will be able to create something as stunning as that if you have any geospatial data to visualize. So with all that being said, I think we're now ready to jump into the demo. So as I said, today we'll be creating two charts with Flourish. The first one is an animated area chart story that basically, as I said, transitions from a traditional stacked area chart to a grid of charts. And in that way, we kind of like provide the viewers with two separate views of the same data set. The first one, like the stacked area chart, is more of like a global trend. And then we break it down into a chunk of like small multiples, which basically allows for a deeper exploration and deeper understanding of the data. So we'll create that today. And the second thing, as I said, is animated maps with annotations. So we will be using our 3D map template to create this kind of like animated map story that hopefully it's fun to look and to create. Today, for this specific demo, we have found this UFO sightings dataset. So that might be a fun one to kind of like give a go. Both charts will be ready for duplication and for you to explore, play around, and make your own once you get the slides. So today, if you would like to just focus on what am I doing step by step, you don't have to recreate anything. You don't have to make any notes. You can always watch the recording or get the ready-made chart and try it out yourself after. Before that, I'm just gonna quickly stop for a second and check with Annie. Are there any questions or are we happy to jump straight into the demo?
I'm handling the questions. We can jump into the demo.
All right, perfect. Great. No, that's a spoiler for later. Okay, as I said, the first demo for today is actually going to be this stacked area chart. So we have everything here, again, like, yeah, and then we will be creating this one kind of animation. So for this data set, we have everything we need here in Google Sheets. Basically, we have one column for all of the years in our data from 1975 all the way up to 2022. And then in each column, we basically have the numerical data of basically the number of all asylum seekers requests that each country or region, depending on which column exactly we're talking about, have received over a given amount of time. The point of our story actually is to show that these 5 countries alone have accumulated more than 40% of all the worldwide asylum seeker requests in the latest years. That's why here we're using 5 countries, and then here we're using regions. So to create a chart like that, basically, all I need to do is go to the Flourish app and click here on New Visualization. You will notice that we have many templates and starting points that you can use. If this is the first time that you see the Flourish interface, you can always use the filters on the left as well to kind of like filter down the chart type or the starting point that you need straight away. But because I actually know that I want to create a proportional area chart or a stacked area chart, I can just select this starting point here and open it. Here you can see that like we in Flourish have two windows. One of them is a preview window and one of them is the data tab. And in the data tab is where all the magic actually happens. Basically with every chart type or starting point in Flourish, we have provided dummy data so that you can kind of like clearly see what's the desired structure for this specific template or this specific chart view in order for it to work. And in here, we can see that we have one column for the years from 1900 to 2020, and different regions in each column with numerical data. Luckily for us, my data set is exactly in the same format. So what I can do is I can literally just copy, go back to my visualization, click here on the data and clear the sheet so I can start fresh and just paste the data. Perfect. Now, Flourish on its own will kind of like try to analyze your data set, determine whether each specific column contains date time, data type, whether that's a number or text, and will try to bind the relevant columns here on the right. So for example, like you can now see that like it successfully recognized that my columns, these ones are numerical, but it actually bound B to H. Oh, okay, perfect. It did it. It's on its own. Fantastic. I feel like my internet might be lagging slightly, so I do apologize if I have to refresh from time to time. But yes, here is our chart already bound automatically by Flourish. Again, I'm just going to quickly go back to the data tab and see, again, like for labels and time, we have all the years. And then for all of our numerical values, we have them bound under here. Going back to the preview tab, this is fine, but there is a lot of all the colors of the rainbow. There is a bit too much going on here. So the first thing that I would like to fix first, is actually the colors. Under colors here, you will see that you have the option to choose from many color palettes, and you can also edit them, add your own colors, or if you're a member of a company in Flourish, if you have team branding, the team branding of your organization will apply by default with your branded colors, branded fonts, and everything else. But for today, I actually want to use the custom override settings, because the custom overrides allow me to specify specific colors for specific series. So for example, here, if we look at Turkey for a second, and I want Turkey to be red, I can just type Turkey red and Turkey will immediately shade in red. I can also, of course, use a hex code and anything else, but this is how kind of like the color custom overrides work in general. In order for me to save everybody a bit of time and spare any typos, I have created a bit of a cheat sheet here with my color overrides and other bits and bobs that we'll use later. But here, for example, basically I have provided different hex codes and colors for different countries and regions. So essentially all of that here is that the countries that have been specifically named, such as Turkey, Germany, Iran, etc., they go with a specific color, and then the rest, all different regions, are going in gray. So if I copy paste that, you will see that immediately now everything just worked as magic. And now we have like just the countries colored. Then continuing further with just like some basic customization. Obviously, if we have all the labels here by default, we don't necessarily need a legend either, which in fact kind of might be a bit more redundant as well, especially now that most of my regions are in gray. So what I can do is I can literally go under legend and just turn it off. And a couple of other things that might be good. In this specific stacked chart, I actually like to change the line curve to not be kind of like wobbly, but in fact to be a step because this actually shows me, like, I don't know, it's a personal preference, but I just feel that like this kind of works a bit better when it comes to this specific data set where we can really see like how many percentages these 5 countries stack up to in total by over a certain period of time. So I'm just gonna keep it up to like, yeah, with a step curve. And another thing is that under the x-axis, you will see that Flourish kind of like provides more space just to let everything breathe a little bit by default by increasing the x-axis up to 2025. However, my dataset actually goes all the way up to 2022. And to avoid any kind of like confusion for the reader, what I can do here is I can go to configure default min and max values and just turn this setting off. And in that way, kind of like things are going to be looking a bit more structured and organized. And last but not least, we need to provide kind of like some visual clue of what are users, like viewers, seeing on screen when it comes to the y-axis, like what exactly do these values represent? And we can do this by simply adding a suffix of a percentage. Because what we're doing here is we're like, yeah, we're comparing the kind of like the stacked percentage. And simple as that, we can now see much better and like understand much better what exactly this chart tells us when it comes to the specific 5 countries in this data set. Of course, no chart is ready without a header and a subtitle. So going under the header settings here, we can just write our title and subtitle to avoid any typos. Again, I'm just going to copy paste everything from my cheat sheet, which is my header that 5 countries received over 40% of the world's asylum requests in 2022. And I'm just going to add a subtitle to provide more context. Now, this is quite big. By default, we kind of like leave the titles and the subtitles, the labels, quite big and visible for accessibility purposes. But depending on the font, like the font that we're currently using could look a tad too big. So I'll actually just reduce this slightly to 1.4. And I'll reduce the subtitle to 1.2. And maybe we can decrease the space above. Yeah, I think that looks great. Perfect. Our chart is practically ready. Now, the one last thing that I wanted to show you, which is a super cool setting, is under the legend again. As you remember, we turned off the legend mode. However, there is one more setting here that might sound a bit confusing when you first see it. It basically says add data colors to header text, and it's off by default. But if I actually demonstrate what it does, if I turn it to auto, basically what this setting does is that it looks whether in your header and in your subtitle there are mentions of any of your data series, such in our case, Germany and Pakistan, and colors those words in exactly the same color as the series in your chart. So in that way, it creates some sort of a legend. This could be a really, really good cool way to kind of like reduce additional clutter and use these kind of like header colors as opposed to a traditional legend if you're running out of space and things like that. But generally, yeah, this is a very, very nice setting that I encourage all of you to kind of use, also because it's just so easy to create. So that's it. Our first chart is ready. All I need to do here is just give it a name. I'll do Asylum Seekers 1. And I'll just duplicate the chart here. And instead of having this copy here, I will just put number 2 here. Now, the reason why I duplicated the chart, this is kind of like a very handy way for you to try and, first of all, if you need to experiment with different views of your visualization, I always recommend duplicating your chart, but also it's a really cool way for you to save some time. So now, because I want to create a grid of charts with this exact same dataset, with the exact same colors, header, etc. Instead of me creating the same chart but from scratch, all I need to do is duplicate it, then go to grid mode here and just simply select grid of charts. Now I say simply, but this doesn't necessarily look very good yet. But the difference is that at the moment we have like a grid of mini charts, but all of them are stacked for up to 100% because they're split individually. All I need to do is just go over here and instead of stacked percentage, just choose a stacked chart. And in that way, we kind of like provide the viewer with like this broken down view where we now don't see percentages, but we see actual values. Now, obviously, this is not a percentage anymore because we're using the real values from our data set. So what we can do here is we can go back to the number formatting, remove the suffix of a percentage because we're actually talking about 6 million in this particular case. Go to our advanced settings. That's completely optional, but I just do like it when it comes to avoiding some sort of clutter. In this setting called multiply and divide values, here we can just use this setting that's called 10 to the power of, which what it does, it's basically decreasing the zeros, the trailing zeros of your y-axis. So at the moment we have 6 million in the y-axis, but if I reduce it to -6, you will see that it automatically changes to just 1 decimal. And here, instead of 6 million spelled out by numbers, what we can do is literally add a suffix of an M. And this is how we show to the viewer that we're indeed talking about 6 million. Last but not least, another very good benefit of the grid of charts is for us to actually see like a very deep dive into each specific country or region in our case. And we can do this by turning off this setting because at the moment, every single country or region stacks on this y-axis, which goes all the way up to 6 million. However, if I turn it off, you will see that now every single grid has its own kind of like little axes where like Turkey goes up to 4 million, but Southern Africa, for example, goes all the way up to 2 million because Southern Africa as a region simply has received less asylum requests than Turkey. And this is a really cool way for you to kind of like dive even deeper into your data set without creating how many, 10 different charts or whatever. But since everybody will probably agree that this is a bit too small, all I can do is like set a fixed number of columns in each chart. So for example, up to 4. And I think this looks pretty decent. Now we can actually see everything properly. Here we can hover over everything, create all these amazing things. And our grid of chart is ready. The one last thing that we have left for this demo is just to combine both of them. And we did this by, I rushed a bit too much. But basically, all we need to do is kind of like click here on this button that says create a story with this visualization. And then you will kind of like get sent straight to the story mode. Perfect, like this. And now I only need to add my first area chart. So to do this, I'm going to click here at the bottom, new slide, choose a visualization, and I will choose my asylum seekers 1. Here it is. I do want this to be first as opposed to this chart. So here what I'll do is I'll literally just drag it and drop it on top. So now that's voila, we have our first chart with a stacked area, and then that splits into a grid of charts. I like yet another thing to show you, again, this is a very personal preference, but to create even a more kind of like stunning and wowy effect, what you can do is simply decrease the animation speed. Under animation, you can see that at the moment, we have set the animation duration to 800 milliseconds, but I can increase it to up to 1300, for example. And here, if I refresh my chart again, you will see that my initial area chart kind of like loads very quickly, and then my grid of charts just kind of like morph a bit slower. And yeah, it just takes a second more of a time, but I think it's better looking. So that's it. This is our first kind of like animated story that tells a very insightful, insightful narrative in just 2 slides without having to create many, many different things. Moving on with our second demo, that's our map. Basically, just as a reminder, we have this animated map story that showcases actually asks the question whether the United States are indeed a UFO hotspot. And then here we have this very cool and fun transitioning with annotations, providing more interesting facts about the dataset or like speculations about why something has happened, why it hasn't. So we most likely wouldn't recreate exactly the same annotations just for the sake of time, but you have access to this chart, and you can duplicate and edit it and have exactly the same chart as you're seeing right here. But let's see where we're gonna get up to. So with the animated map stories, as with the our line bar pie charts, all we need to do is go here on new visualization and look for a map. What I like to do with maps in particular is actually using the filters, because you will notice that we have many maps and many starting points, including regions and different kind of like districts and anything for a lot of countries. So you can always get started with some of those. And if you want the regions for a specific country and we don't have them available at the moment, you can always email us and we will do our best to add it here to our starting points as well. But what we actually need for today is an animated point map, because we want to create a 3D map with a timeline. So I'm just going to click here. And as you can see here, again, the chart loads immediately with some sort of a data set already in there. As far as I remember, this basically shows kind of like earthquake data over time, and it works great. But we don't want to create this chart. We want our UFO chart. So if we go to the data tab, things with maps do look slightly bit different than the line bar pie, in the sense that you have a couple of sheets here. One for regions, one for points, one for lines, and one for inset maps. The good news is that in 99% of the cases, you will need the points sheet. The 3D map in particular uses latitude and longitude coordinates to kind of like visualize your points, which are really easy to obtain. You can even ask any chat model, ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever, to generate latitude and longitude in case you don't have the time or you don't have the resources available to get them. And basically uses a date to bind under start time so that we have the timeline and the animation. And it has some sort of a location or a label for us to kind of like be more specific with what exactly do we visualize. And in our data set for the UFO, although I do think that the new name of UFO is now UAP or something, so I do apologize if I'm using an outdated term, but in our data set, we have exactly the same structure. So in our first column, we have a date and time column. Then we have the city, the state, the country. Then we have the exact location and latitude and longitude coordinate. So as with my current data set, all I can do is I can literally just copy paste it, get back to my visualization and just clear the sheet and paste my chart. Now here, you will notice again that basically Flourish is kind of like binding something from what we had before in terms of like column binds. But at the moment, this is not actually really true because our latitude and longitude coordinates are in columns F and G. So what I need to do here is I can just go here under F and longitude on like column G. And you will see now that if I go back to the preview tab, basically all of our points are now here in place. The last thing, however, is that for the start time, at the moment, obviously, column C doesn't do anything. What we need bound under the time is column A. So column A here with my month, date, year, and the timestamp, so hour and minute. But interestingly enough, even if I go back to the preview tab of my 3D map, you will notice that my animation is not playing. My timeline is not working. And I am showing you this because in 80% of the time, this is kind of like the biggest struggle with the 3D map or with any animated map template. But there is a very easy way for you to actually fix the reason why this is not playing the way it should be. And the reason for this is because most likely at the moment, Flourish doesn't recognize the current date and time format that we have provided our data with. So in order for you to check whether this is the case, you can go here under points and you can see that if we scroll a little bit down, you can see this setting called date time format in data. This uses a D3 time format syntax for those of you who are familiar, and there are many options for you to choose from. Obviously, Flourish will do this automatically in a lot of the cases. And when it comes to like providing just dates, like usually there is no problem at all. The issue comes when you also have the hour, like the hour and the minute timestamp, because at the moment, this is kind of like the only default recognizable date and time timestamp, but our data is actually not structured in this way. So if you're thinking, oh no, now I need to go back to Google Sheets and reformat everything, etc., that's actually not the solution. We have an easier way. And actually, in Flourish, we have this help doc here that basically provides you this kind of a cheat sheet again of how your minutes and hours should be structured in order for you to kind of like make your timeline work. So you don't have to remember it. You can always find it in the Flourish Help Center. But basically, to kind of like wrap your hand around it, maybe I can just show you with our current visualization. So basically, here we have this date time format. I'll just copy paste it here so you can see better. And what that means is that basically here we have our month, our day, our year, and then the hour and the minute. And by using the guide here in our help docs, I know that the month is basically represented by this syntax, so percentage %m, then followed by this dash here, percentage day, and then followed by another dash here, percentage year. Then we have a bit of a space between the date and the time. So I just put a space, and then here the hours and the minutes are represented by like this, H and M. So if I delete this here and leave only the syntax, I can simply add a new value here. And if I zoom out, my visualization is now playing as normal. And we have all of our dates from January up until May 2023 playing, and everything is fine, and Flourish is happy, and we're happy. So if you want to create an animated map, again, I emphasize that for me, this is literally the hardest thing when it comes to animated point maps. Everything else that I'm going to be showing you from here on is purely customization and just kind of like aesthetic things, which you can choose like based on your own personal preferences. For example, when it comes to point colors here, we can use this kind of like a bit of a neon green, like this hex code, just so like it represents more of like an alien or UFO like cliche color. We can, if I zoom in here a bit further down, you can see here that we can change the appearance of our points. So you can have them as circles as they are right now, or you can have them as pulses, which are a bit more kind of like animated and funky. So maybe we can stick to that. But of course, as I'm saying, like all of those are just cosmetic changes. They're nothing too serious with when it comes to the 3D map. As long as you have your latitude, longitude coordinates and the right date and time format, you have no problems at all. But one last thing I just wanted to tweak slightly here is actually under the timeline, because at the moment, as you can see, because my line chart is representing the same color category as my points, at the moment, this green on this gray background is just a bit too much. So what we can do here is we can go under chart settings and just remove the background so we keep it white. And for example, reduce the height to, okay, 3 is a bit too much, too little, 4. Perfect. As always, you can add a title or subtitle, but for this demo, you already know how to do this. So I'll pretend that I already have a header and I'll just skip that point for now. Instead, what I'll focus on is actually creating a story again, because this is where like all this animation comes to life. Because if you remember, like let's say that, for example, I want to focus on the United States in this specific visualization and kind of like the West. So if I do this, and if I want my visualization to stay like this when it's embedded and added to my website, for example, if I publish and embed the visualization itself, it's not actually going to save the state of my zooming or anything like that. It will just refresh. Sorry, should wait for it a bit. Yes, it will just refresh to its initial state. So basically showing the world view. However, this will change when I actually add it to a story. Because in a story mode, what I can do is I can choose to zoom into, let's say California or something like that. And if I actually refresh the story now or embed the story will actually remember where we've put our kind of like last save state. So this is a huge benefit whenever you're using stories, whether that's like with a specific filter selected or with like a specific state. That doesn't work just like that with just with maps. It works with everything else. So you can always use this handy feature. And if you actually don't want to have these like one slides, let's say that you just want to save a specific state, all you need to do here is go under slides and disable the navigation. That's everything. And now it's going to work like a visualization. However, we do need actually a story at the moment, because what we want to do is create an animated story. And in order for us to duplicate and do everything from the beginning, etc., what I'll do is actually zoom out a little bit. So go back to a world view, kinda, and then duplicate my slide. And you see that immediately the same chart has duplicated. But now I can zoom in back to California, do something like this, for example. Yeah, that looks good. And now if I switch between slide 1 and slide 2, you see the stunning default transition between my two default states, where like we have this just immaculate transition between one view and another. We can take this a step further by using this annotation symbol here. Basically, in story modes, you can also add annotations in your charts. So for example, if I just click here, drag this a little bit, and type my annotation. I've already typed it out, which is here. So what I can do is I can literally just type my annotation text and again, customize the look and feel of this annotation. At the moment, this doesn't necessarily work because the background is a bit too hard to read. So instead of an outline, I'm just going to use a background. I'm going to turn it to black like this. I'm going to turn the text color to white, of course. And I am also going to change the line color so it's actually more visible like this. Last but not least, we can also add a marker type. So for example, that could be either a rectangle or a circle or just a small point. But I like the circle here where I can focus on all of those clutters here in California that have been reported as sightings. So something like this. And maybe I can just reduce the text size a bit. Perfect. So now if we close the annotation window, here is our annotation. If we duplicate the slide again, the annotation will copy as well. So all I need to do here is go back to the annotation. I obviously don't need this anymore on my slide tree. So all I need to do is like literally drag it and drop it here, for example, like this, and write my new annotation. So this is a hack that I highly recommend, because if you create an annotation from scratch, you will have to customize everything back again. So if you just like drag and drop your previous annotation from your previous slide, you avoid doing that from scratch, and like it just saves a little bit more time. So in here, for example, I'm just going to add my second annotation, which provides a little bit more context as of why there might have been more sightings. Maybe we can increase the width a little bit and just decrease the size again. Okay, that's a bit too much, something like that. Flourish will also automatically try to kind of like align your text. Perfect. Let's say that this is good. Something like this. And now if we actually go back from slide 1, we go to slide 2, where we zoom into California and with the sightings, and then we go to slide 3, where we zoom into the border of the United States and Canada. However, you will notice one more thing, that in my annotation here, for example, we say only things about February and March. So instead of us showing the whole timeline, let's say that someone's changes this slide when they're in May and they need to wait all the way to February or March. What we can do is like we can select to play a specific portion of our timeline by literally just dragging and dropping the time frame that you want to be played. And now, regardless of like where the user is when they zoom and they move to my slide, it will always start playing from February until March, and then it will refresh. So this is how you basically can go on and on and on and have 100 slides of your 3D map. One last thing, again, similarly to what we saw just a couple of seconds ago, under the underlying 3D map visualization, once it loads, I do apologize again. Perfect. There should be a setting about animation. I do like to use the search bar because the settings panel can become a bit overwhelming sometimes. But yes, under viewport and interaction settings, you have animation again for the 3D map. So I can set it for duration in seconds to be 2 seconds, for example, as opposed to 1 second. And now our story will have even more kind of like a smooth animation from one state to another. So for example, this is state 1, then it takes 2 seconds to go to state 2, and then it takes 2 seconds to go to state 3. So that's it. This is how you basically create a 3D map, hopefully not too overwhelming or scary. And yeah. This is the end of our demo and the end of our webinar, actually. I do have just a couple more things to show you, but these are more things that come with animation out of the box, which are 3 very cool Flourish templates that I highly recommend when you're creating an animated story. All of those work super nice in a Flourish story as well, so do give them a go. But probably too much information as well for one single webinar, so I'll let you explore this in your own free time. And that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully all of this was super useful to you, and see you again very soon. But before you go, for the core Flourish fans, I'm just gonna let Annie give some news.
Hello, guys. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you all really enjoyed the session. Thank you so much to Simona. Just a few things in case you missed it. We now have the option to include a button for users to download the data in your charts, and also to add timestamps for when your data was last updated. You just choose whether or not you want to add this in the footer settings of any charts. And also selective data point labeling is now available in line bar pi, which is very exciting. And you can check out anything else that's new in our changelog, which is linked in the slides, which will be sent to you by email by the end of the week, along with the recording of this webinar. But again,
Sorry.
thank you so much, everyone, for joining. If you have any other questions, or if there was any questions that we missed, please do reach out to us. You can contact us at flourish-webinar@canva.com for webinar specific questions, or hello@flourish.studio for absolutely anything else. And also make sure you follow us on our social media. So we have X. I'm not going to read that username out. You guys can see it there. We are also on Instagram at Made with Flourish, and on LinkedIn as well. And if you make any charts and you share them on socials, please do tag us in them. We absolutely love to see what everyone's been making. But yes, if you have any questions, do reach out to us. And I believe that is all from us today. So thank you so much. And we will see you again next time.
Perfect. Thank you.